Hey guys, welcome back. Summer of the Secret Squadron. I'm super excited to find out what happens today. Chapter 12. The library was just up and across the street, 1 block from the Landers. We raced across Main and up the 13 concrete steps to the front door. But before we went inside, Sumner and I had a talk with Logan. Now look, we don't want to let anyone know what we're doing, so don't go in there and tell Mrs. Payne what we're up to, okay, Logan? I said, making sure he realized I was talking to him. Okay, Logan answered. And if someone is in the history section while we're looking for the secret compartment or whatever it is, then just play it cool and act like we're looking at old books. Got it? Sumner said, aiming the question at Logan again. I got it, Logan said in a voice to let us know he was getting irritated at our insinuations. Let's just go already. The day was already heating up, and as we walked through the glass doors, the cold air conditioning sent goosebumps racing across my body. Mrs. Payne, the head librarian, was at the front desk sorting books and shuffling small index cards from pile to pile. Good morning, Mrs. Payne said. How are you boys doing today? Great, Logan said, making faces at us as Mrs. Payne went back to work at her stack of books. Hey guys, let's go back here, I said quietly, pointing to a cluster of tables out of view of Mrs. Payne. We were the only ones in the library, and Mrs. Payne was apparently the only library working at this early morning hour. We sat both backpacks on one of the tables and pulled out the notebook. Okay, the clue for the library. Here it is, Sumner said, scanning one of the pages. 27th day of July. Gym. All other confidential equipment and papers can be found in the library inside the toe kick of the bookshelf located in the northwest corner of the history section. What's a toe kick? Logan asked. A football, I said jokingly. That's so funny I forgot to laugh, Logan said. A toe kick is that space at the bottom of the shelf or along kitchen cabinets that they leave so you won't stump your toe. I asked Dad last night. All right, we're going to need a compass, Sumner said, detaching it from his belt loop. The history section was to the left as you entered the library, and unfortunately Mrs. Payne could monitor most of the area standing at the front desk. We thought she might be a little suspicious of all three of us going into the history section since it was pretty much all adult material, and the fact was that we rarely ever went there. We decided Sumner would go in first and find the northwest corner, while Logan and I distracted her. Then Logan would sneak in, and then finally me. Logan and I chose a book at the back of the juvenile literature section and hid it on another shelf, and then I strolled up to the front to ask for help. Mrs. Payne, could you help me find a book? I asked, acting as innocent as I could. Sure, what book are you looking for? She asked, stepping out from behind the desk. Where the Red Fern Grows, I said. Oh, that's a good book, Benjamin, Mrs. Payne said. But you do know it has somewhat of a sad ending. No, I didn't, but I'd like to look at it anyway. I was not prepared for her questions. I followed Mrs. Payne to the back of the library as Sumner made his way to the history section. Logan was supposed to stay inside of us, pretending to look at books, but he had already made his move as well, probably beating Sumner. Mrs. Payne stopped in front of the shelf that should have contained the book. It should be on this shelf if no one has checked it out, Mrs. Payne said, scanning the row of books. I don't see it. Let me go to the card catalog to make sure I'm looking in the right place. The card catalog was back up front, but on the opposite side of the history section. As I followed Mrs. Payne, I squinted my eyes and held my breath as if somehow that would keep her from noticing my two friends. And apparently it worked. Because not even I could see them. Mrs. Payne pulled out one of the long drawers and found Where the Red Fern Grows in 2 seconds flat. Yes, we were looking in the right place, she said. Let's go see if it's been checked out. Mrs. Payne left the card catalog and made her way to the front desk. There was still no sign of Logan and Sumner. I wanted to leave Miss Payne and go see what was going on in the next room, but I didn't see how I could ever make it without her seeing me. While Mrs. Payne looked through the stack of green cards, I wandered over toward the history section and pretended to look at the display of biographies. From there, I could nonchalantly peer into one corner of the history section out of the view from the front desk. Sure enough, I could see the brothers down on their hands and knees trying to pry off the toe kick from one of the shelves. They were going to find it without me. I started pacing back and forth, which is usually what I do when I get nervous or anxious, or I'm trying to really concentrate. I had to get in there, fast, but couldn't think of any way. Actually, I thought of several ways, but all of them were crazy. We could tie Mrs. Payne up, or better yet, hit her over the head and knock her unconscious. Maybe I could pull the fire alarm. These wild thoughts and others kept running through my head, crowding out any reasonable idea from ever registering. Suddenly, Mrs. Payne's hand was on my shoulder and awakened me back from my temporary insanity. "Benjamin, are you okay?" Mrs. Payne asked with a worried look on her face. "I'm sorry, I haven't been able to find the book you wanted, but we can look again if you want. You can also do an interlibrary loan. That would probably take a couple days." I realized then Mrs. Payne thought all my pacing was about where the red fern grows. "Oh, that's okay. No big deal. I'll find something else," I said, trying to return to normalcy, even if only to relieve Mrs. Payne and her concern over my state. "Why don't we go back here, and I'll help you find some books that I think you'll enjoy," she persuaded. "Okay, thanks," I said, following her to the back once more. Mrs. Payne began pulling out all kinds of books that she highly recommended, which I quickly agreed to all of her excellent choices. But this did not stop her. Apparently, she wanted to make sure she found an acceptable replacement for where the red fern grows. She continued to yank books from every shelf like some runaway robot. I just about lost it again, when out of nowhere, Sumner reappeared and rescued me. "Did you find any books?" I asked with my eyebrows raised to my hairline. No, not yet." Sumner understood. I didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed. "Mrs. Payne has several here that we can share," I said, turning to get her attention. "I'm sure this will be plenty, Mrs. Payne. Thank you for your help." Mrs. Payne smiled. "Any time. I'd still be glad to do an interlibrary loan for you if you'd like." "Maybe some other time," I said. "Thanks anyway." I thought then that librarians must earn a commission on interlibrary loans, the way they never miss an opportunity to offer you this service. When finally Mrs. Payne walked back to her desk, Sumner began filling me in on what I had missed. They had found the northwest corner, where not one, but two bookshelves were located, neither of which showed any sign of a loose toe kick, even though he and Logan had tried every tool in our pack. Of course, I couldn't help but believe that if only I could get into that room, I would be able to pry it off for sure. "Sumner, you've got to be the decoy now so that I can get a chance to go in," I pleaded. "Okay, but how?" Sumner questioned. "We always stay back here in this section. If she comes back here and you're not here reading one of these books she's picked out, she might start wondering where you are." "You're right," I agreed. "Let's see. I know. Tell her about your new woodworking tools and see if she can find any books on woodworking for kids or something like that." "That sounds good," Sumner said, looking surprised that I came up with something smart that quick. Apparently, I was thinking clearly again. Sumner walked up to the front desk while I snaked around through the towering bookshelves to keep from being seen. I listened to Mrs. Payne express her pleasure in helping Sumner. As she led him back to the how-to section and out of view, I darted into the history section to find Logan using my Swiss Army knife in an attempt to pry off one of the toe kicks. "Still haven't got it?" I asked Logan. "It won't budge, neither of them," Logan responded. "Are you sure this is the northwest corner?" "There's the compass, see for yourself." I picked up the compass. Northwest corner, all right. I squatted down to take a better look. I could see where Logan and Sumner had scarred up the ends of each board, trying their best to pry them loose. Of course, that did not stop me from trying as well. I began with my flathead screwdriver blade and moved from that to a ballpoint pen, then a nail, and finally a corkscrew on my Swiss Army knife. I had the same luck as Sumner and Logan. "What if these aren't the bookcases?" Logan pondered. "Well, this is the northwest corner of the history section," I remarked. "But the boards in the belfry pried up easily, and the ones in your room did too." Logan was using deductive reasoning. I was impressed. But look at all those books, I pointed out. There must be 500 pounds of books stacked on these shelves. All that weight over the past 60 years has probably pinned them in here for good. What are we going to do? Logan sighed. We put our heads together to try to think of another way, but the only thing that came to mind was somehow to pull the bookshelf out away from the wall. The only problem was there were 500 pounds of books in 8-foot tall by 4-foot wide shelves, and the fact that they were bolted to the wall. We could take the books off the shelves, Logan suggested. But what about the bolts? I asked. We took a closer look. Actually, there was only one large screw on each side holding the shelves to the wall. I retrieved the flathead screwdriver from my pack to see if I could turn the screw. It took all I had, but with enough pressure and torque, the screw began to turn. Logan cheered quietly, but I still wasn't convinced. I moved around to the other side and tried the other screw. It was even easier. Are we going to do this? Logan asked. I don't know. I wish Sumner was here to help make the decision. It will take a long time to clear all these books, and the longer it takes, the more likely it is that we will get caught. But it's the only way, Logan said. But what if we do get caught? I worried. Then I guess we'll get caught. I don't think Mrs. Payne will have us arrested. After all, it's not illegal to remove books from a shelf. In fact, I think that's what they're here for. You're so funny, I said sarcastically. Well, why are you standing there wasting time? Let's get started. We began pulling the big, dusty books off one of the bookcases and stacking them in neat rows so we could remember which books went on each shelf. It was going more quickly than I imagined, so I let Logan continue with the books while I took up the screwdriver and began removing the screws. I couldn't decide what to do about Sumner. I hated to find anything without him, but someone was going to have to miss the big moment. I decided that Logan and I would pursue looking under this bookcase. If we didn't find anything under it, then we would get Sumner in here and let him, and hopefully me, work on the other bookcase. After what seemed like an hour, most likely 4 or 5 minutes, I was able to free the 3-inch screws from the wall brackets. Despite the cool air blowing from the vents, Logan and I were sweating like pigs. We still had the top 2 shelves to go, neither of which we could reach from the standing on the floor. Luckily, in the room there was one of those odd little rolling stools that operated on some kind of spring-load system. With it, we could reach the lower shelf, but even with the stool, we could reach only the bottom edge of the uppermost books. Together, we cleared the lower shelf. Then we took 2 of the largest books off the next bookcase and used them for an added height. It was just enough to allow me to get a good grip on the bottom edge of the books and pull them down for Logan to take from me. Occasionally, Logan had to hold me steady so that I could reach far enough back to grab some of the heavier books. But finally, we were done, and no sign of Sumner or Mrs. Payne. Well, are you ready to take a look? I asked with a grin. Rock and roll, Logan said. We both grabbed aside in order to move the case away from the wall, but try as we might, the bookshelf wouldn't move. We looked again to make sure we hadn't missed any other wall brackets. And then it dawned on me. I remember trying to move a bookcase in Mrs. Shin's 4th grade class. Because of the yearly floor waxing, it was stuck to the floor. It took quite a hard knock to release it. I told Logan to come down on my end so we could ram the side of the bookcase together. After 4 or 5 hits, we were just about to wonder if it would ever move, but the 6th try was the charm. The pop of the old floor wax releasing the shelf was so loud we thought Mrs. Payne would surely come running, but she didn't. Ever so gently, Logan and I eased the bookshelf away from the wall, and then we both rushed from behind to see what we had found. 2 small scraps of paper and some dust bunnies the size of Texas. We decided that that was not what the boy had hidden. All that work for nothing, Logan groaned. Let's hope it's under this other bookcase, I said. Let's get going, Logan sighed, pulling off books from the other bookcase. Shouldn't one of us go and relieve Sumner? I asked suggestively. I'll go in a little bit, he stated. Let's get some of these books off first. Logan hated the work, but he wasn't about to miss out on whatever we might be finding. Once again, we began the task of pulling books and removing screws. It seemed to take so much more time, that while I was prodding Logan to go and relieve Sumner, finally the screws were out. I left Logan to do the job while I snuck out of the history room. I made a pit stop at the water fountain to try and cool off, and then I went looking for Sumner. Sure enough, there he was, still in the how-to section with Mrs. Payne. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. It was still very obvious that I had been sweating, so I couldn't just walk up to Sumner and Mrs. Payne without her noticing. I decided to try the old peek through the bookcase trick. That is, I was going to try and call Sumner away while standing on the other side of the bookcase. As I positioned myself to speak through the books, suddenly I heard it. Everyone heard it. Crash! The noise echoed through the library and unmistakably came from the direction of the history room. Sumner and I and even Mrs. Payne ran full throttle into the room to find the bookcase toppled over with Logan sprawled underneath. "Logan, are you okay?" Mrs. Payne voiced her concern. I'm okay, Logan assured us as he crawled out from underneath the bookcase. If it hadn't been for that stool, you would have been crushed, Sumner noted. What do you think I was standing on? Logan said disgustedly. What in the world were you doing in here, Logan? Mrs. Payne wanted to know now that Logan seemed to be all right. Well, it's kind of hard to explain, he squirmed. Well, I'd kind of like to hear an explanation anyway, Mrs. Payne pressed. Mrs. Payne, it wasn't just Logan, I admitted. We were all in on this mess. We explained what we had been doing from the beginning to the end, how we found the secret messages which led us to finding the comic books in the belfry, and how we had reason to believe something was hidden underneath these bookcases. It would have helped our credibility if something had actually been under the bookcases, but we found nothing under the fallen one either. Mrs. Payne believed us and was surprisingly very forgiving about the whole matter. We helped get the shelves and the books back in order and made sure the bookcases were once again secured to the wall. As we packed up and were ready to move out, Mrs. Payne caught us as we made our way out the door. Logan, do you realize you could have been badly hurt today? Mrs. Payne questioned in all seriousness. Yes, ma'am, Logan said politely. You boys be careful and think about what you're doing, okay? Mrs. Payne looked at all three of us. Yes, ma'am, we all repeated. Thank you for not getting upset about all this, I said. She nodded and smiled as we pushed our way through the glass doors, making our way out into the hot summer day. Ben's dad was worried about us getting hurt on the Landers' roof, and you'll have to try and get yourself killed in the library? Sumner shouted this, sounding more like Logan's father than his brother. I'm sorry, okay? Logan shouted back. It was brotherly love in action. Sure, they were yelling, but it didn't fool me. This near miss scared both of them, and it scared me too. All right, guys. Everything's okay now, I said. Do you need a hug or something? Just shut up, Sumner said. Logan gave me a dirty look as well. I said it was okay, and I'm okay, Logan stated. We didn't find anything here, so let's move on. I stuck my fist in between Sumner and Logan, and they followed suit. 1, 2, 3, Secret Squadron. And that's the end of Chapter 12.